He's a fisherman and he lives in Gaza, and every day he goes out in his simple little boat to try to catch fish. He can't get very far because the Israeli Navy turns up every day with great big ships, and they prevent him from fishing further than 3 miles out. Although under international law he could be fishing 12 miles out. The water that he fishes in is full of sewage, and that's because the Israelis have bombed the electricity station which supplies the water purification plant, and that sewage goes under Gaza itself into the aquifer. So that's the drinking water that they have, and according to the World Health Organization, the water in Gaza is not fit to be drunk by animals. Okay, so you live in a tower block. You live in a tower block with your wife and your 3 kids, another child on the way. Relatives, cousins and in-laws also live in the tower block. Last week, Israel bombed your tower block. On the BBC, it was reported that Israeli airstrikes had targeted a militant leader of Hamas. And an Israeli defense spokesperson said, "We're always very careful to avoid causing civilian deaths. But your tower block is now rubble. We saw it on the telly. You are dead. Your children are dead. Lots of your friends and neighbours are dead." And I want to point out the difference between the rockets coming out of Gaza and the bombing of Israel. The rockets are coming out in response to what happened in Jerusalem. The families from Sheikh Jarrah, who even now are being thrown out of their homes with the help of the Israeli police and border police and army, to let your home be lived in by settlers. And the unarmed worshippers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as we've already heard, and that has prompted a response from the rockets. Israel's bombing of Gaza is a war crime. I'm not crazy about rockets coming out of Gaza. I feel great sympathy for the 2 Israeli families who've lost their children to these rockets. It's possibly the worst pain to lose a child. But there are 2 Israeli children who've died. There are 65 Palestinian children who've died, and that tells you a heck of a lot about the disparity in this conflict. It is not a war. There's a huge army against a besieged people. And whatever, as I was saying, whatever you think about the rockets from Gaza, the occupied people have the right under international law to resist occupation, even up to using force. And now I want to talk about Elbit. Have you all heard of Elbit? It's an Israeli arms company, and it has 4 factories in this country. And Palestine Action keeps getting on the roofs of these factories and closing them down for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days. Last week, some Palestine Action people were on the roof of an Elbit factory in Leicester. The police came along, they couldn't do very much, so they sent for the fire brigade. The fire brigade came along. Once they realised it was Palestine Action people they were supposed to remove from the roof, they all got back in their fire engines and drove away. Because the fire brigade union supports freedom for Palestine. The fire brigade union opposes occupation. It opposes the illegal siege of Gaza. And there are lots of grassroots people like you, like me, around the world who are standing against it. The employees of Google have started to complain that their company favours Israel over Palestine. In Italy and in South Africa, dockers are refusing to load up Israeli ships. So we need to all join together. There's going to be a debate in Palestine, in Parliament next week, about imposing sanctions on Israel. That's because an ordinary person like you or me started a petition, and if you get 100,000 people signing a petition, you get this happening in Parliament, and over 300,000 people signed this particular petition, and there we go. So yes, so I don't know if anybody saw Baroness Varsi this week in the House of Lords, and she absolutely excoriated her own party, her own government, because they do not implement their own policies. She started out by talking about the two-state solution. We won't go there, it's a dead in the water, but it is our government's policy. And she said, not only has our government not recognised the state of Israel, although that's its policy, the ministers won't even mention the word Palestine. Then she talked about the settlements. Our government is opposed to the illegal settlements in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. They're opposed to it. That's the policy. But what do they do about it? Nothing. Israel just expands and expands and expands, and we just say, oh, naughty Israel, slap them over the wrists and let them get on with it. It's our policy to support human rights across the world. However, in Palestine, soldiers burst into people's houses and kidnap children and take them away and stick them in Israeli prisons. They make them sign confessions in a language they don't read or understand, and they're put in solitary confinement, children. And what does our government do? Absolutely nothing. Finally, the spotlight of the International Criminal Court is being turned on Israel, and it's our policy to support the International Criminal Court. What happened? Our Prime Minister said, yeah, well, we're not going to support the International Criminal Court when it's turning its spotlight on Israel. And so it goes on. Our governments fail us. Our governments fail Palestinians. Our governments fail those brave Israelis, some of whom Baroness Varsi mentioned, such as the soldiers and breaking the silence. And Parveen earlier was talking about they're going to wake up one night in middle age and think, did I really do that? Well, there are soldiers who are already thinking that, and they've joined breaking the silence. And Baroness Varsi also mentioned Beit Salem, which is an Israeli human rights organization which supports human rights in Palestine. Just this year, Beit Salem has called the regime in Israel-Palestine apartheid. Let's not be afraid of that word. It's apartheid, and don't let anybody tell you different. So what I'm saying is, let's keep up the pressure, guys. It's great to see you all here, far more than there were last